Well, there is a word out of Kansas City. At least there is a push in KC, which needs help in the defensive backfield to potentially go out and get some help. And it's been floated there that target number one of the Chiefs should be Xavier Rhodes. Now, that's interesting to us because the Vikings salary cap situation and contractual obligations remain very much in flux, and we don't know where that's going to go. But what are your thoughts now when you put two and two together with what Zimmer said in March, and now hearing that Xavier Rhodes might not be a Viking on opening day?
Well, here are the exact numbers for you on the salary cap situation. The Vikings have $793,000 of salary cap room at this moment. In order to sign their first pick, Garrett Bradbury, they need to have $2.3 million in salary cap room. That's a little ways to go. Now, if you look at their top 51, there are some players that they could just straight up cut and try to create that space. But aside from that, either a restructure or a trade has to happen still in order to make this much cap room. And the Kansas City and Xavier Rhodes thing has not gone away. And at the draft, there were rumors through the entire weekend, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that teams were calling on Trey Waynes and teams were calling on Kyle Rudolph. And so we haven't really talked a ton about Xavier Rhodes. But what's interesting about the comments that we played, I didn't actually know about this until draft night that someone sent it to me on Twitter, was that Xavier Rhodes had been favoriting tweets after Zimmer's comments about needing a new place to play and Zimmer putting the blame on everybody else but himself. And he was, or liking tweets. It used to be called favoriting. Now it's called liking tweets.
I'm with you.
But Twitter tracks the tweets that you like, and you can go look at the tweets that people have been liking or saving for themselves, or sometimes everybody uses it differently. Sometimes it's just to give a response without giving a response, just like, oh, okay, I acknowledge that you said something to me. But pretty interesting that fans were tweeting him about needing somewhere else to go, and then he was favoriting them after Zimmer's comments. So clearly Xavier Rhodes was aware of those. Now, that doesn't mean that he would demand a trade or that Zimmer would allow him to walk out the door, but this salary cap problem must be resolved at some point soon for the Vikings to be able to sign Garrett Bradbury. They've still got a little bit of time, and there is the June 1st issue, which is after June 1st, everybody's contract, or some people's contract, switches over to the next year. I'm trying to think of the best way I could describe this convoluted process.
It changes something.
It changes, right? So someone like Riley Reef, the cap number for cutting him changes completely after June 1st. So I don't know if that's the case with Linval Joseph too, but it might be. And this has to do with like signing bonus money and everything else. So there could be some changes that they just wait till June 1st to make. Or something like this could still happen. There's always a trade in June, in May, that ends up surprising us after the draft.
What could you get for him? If Rhodes was taking the market right now, and let's say it's the Chiefs and a secondary team, and you went back and forth, what do you think, with the draft now done, by the way, what could you get for him?
I'm thinking next year's second and a fourth in 2021 or something like that. You're talking about a guy with a pretty huge contract that isn't going away anytime soon. I'll look at how long that they're really under contract with him, because usually the Vikings set it up so they can get out of these deals sooner than so when they say it's a 5-year contract, well, that actually probably means like 3. But even next year, it would be a pretty enormous cap hit if they cut him. Dead money, it'd be $4.8 million. That's a lot.
Yes.
The next year after that, 2021, is when the contract's really over. That's when they could cut him with only $2 million of dead money. So if you're sending that contract to Kansas City, and sometimes with these two, certain amounts of money has to go along with that, so you still take a certain cap hit, it gets really convoluted. But if they did it, my guess is because of his huge cap hit, because he did not have the best season last year, you're probably hoping to get something like a second and a conditional fourth down the road.
A second wouldn't be bad, by the way.
No, but then you don't have Xavier Rhodes.
I don't know that I want to make the trade. Okay, so here's my question then. And I saw, so Rhodes was drafted in the first round during the Frazier regime, and I saw him, and he was okay. He struggled, and which is not surprising. Zimmer got here in 2016, correct? Or 2000, I'm sorry, 14.
14, yep.
14. And in that training camp, he was in Rhodes' back pocket in Mankato on a daily basis and worked with him extensively and helped turn him into an okay ascending player into a very good cornerback in a league where that position gets paid. What's your interpretation of what Mike said in Florida? Because when I hear Mike say that, I think he almost, with a guy like that, takes a personal responsibility of, well, he didn't play well. And it's not that I don't like him, but in Mike's eyes, that's an affront to Mike because I coached him.
Sure.
And so I think that Mike sees him and Rhodes being in lockstep as this is my student, and he learned from me, and we're going to get him back. But Rhodes is not an old man, and he's not going to see things that way. Rhodes could very well take that interpretation and say, this bleeping guy's talking about me publicly. So do you think that what Mike said in Florida changed the dynamic of how Rhodes feels about the Vikings and Mike Zimmer?
Well, I remember a situation with Anthony Barr in 2016 where it not only impacted how Anthony Barr felt about his head coach at the time when Zimmer said he had a tendency to coast, but it also had ripple effects through the entire locker room because I think the locker room felt a little bit betrayed. And also Anthony Barr is really popular in that locker room too. So a lot of players looked at it like, hey, wait a minute, you're pinning this on him that we haven't won as many games as we wanted to, but really it's the offense that's not doing their jobs. And really, Zimmer got out schemed badly against the Indianapolis Colts, which is, this is going back to 2016, but like that was one of the reasons that the corners went rogue in Green Bay. And
including Xavier Rhodes, by the way.
In fact, it started with Xavier Rhodes.
Who gets nervous.
Terrence Newman, yes. And that was what Zimmer said for why Rhodes supposedly got the details of that wrong, but he didn't. Anyway, the cover-up being as bad as the crime in this case. But, that still, I would say, has some reverberations that Zimmer has not had an incident where he has shredded someone until this thing with Xavier Rhodes, where you're right that I think Zimmer is putting it on himself, saying, I didn't coach him up well enough. I have to coach him up better next year, and I will. But if you're Rhodes, clearly the interpretation is not that. The interpretation is, hey, you're throwing me under the bus just like you did with Anthony Barr a few years ago. And if you're Rhodes, you might feel like, hey, I've been a top corner for you. I've been a Pro Bowler for you. How are you saying this stuff about me, especially when he was battling injuries? I had a conversation with Rhodes, not necessarily for an article, but just last year, and he didn't go into great detail, but I just kind of said, how you doing, And because he was looking anguished, taking off some of his gear and stuff, and he just said, it's been tough, man. It's been tough. And I believe it. He has a lot of injuries, and even Zimmer last year was making fun of him for coming off the field when he would get dinged up or something like that. And
said like that's just Xavier being Xavier or something like that.
He kind of made him sound like he was being a diva or something, by coming off the field. And I think that there's been some nagging injuries for him for a couple of years. I could see how this wouldn't sit very well.
And where this makes sense to me as far as him potentially being traded is this. If Rhodes and his people went to Spielman and basically said, enough, get us out of here. Because we've seen this before too, Coller. We've seen this where a coach takes a young player in and helps make that guy a star. So there's no question of the impact that the coach had on that player. But eventually, when you, after years, have said, oh, he got nervous and gave you details when he didn't, smart guy, Rhodes is. And then you get this one where the player gets to a point in his life where he said, I'm a veteran now. This is embarrassing.
Right.
I want out. And the most effective way to do that would be to quietly go to the Vikings and say, you got cap problems. I don't want to be here. Get me out of here.
So here's another part of this.
And we wouldn't find that out, by the way, the secondary part.
Yep.
That would all be kept as quiet as possible.
But here's the other interesting part of this. So Zimmer fully believes that he can make Xavier Rhodes back into the Xavier Rhodes from a couple years ago. And I would like to add that it's not like the guy was a truck fire last year. The opposing quarterback rating when throwing towards Xavier Rhodes last season was 88. So it's not like he was getting lit up like a Christmas tree. He was still below what the rating was for throwing toward Trey Waynes, and consider he's always locked on to the number one wide receiver, so that number's even better. But one of his major issues was he was among the top in penalties. He had 9 penalties last year and missed some time too. So like penalties per snap is really high for Xavier Rhodes and kind of has been. But if he's not truly shutting guys down, that becomes not worth it. And Pro Football Focus dings big for those pass interference penalties because they're big plays.
Yep.
So out of 77 cornerbacks last year that played at least like 600 snaps, so regular corners, 77 in the NFL, Xavier Rhodes was graded 71st last year. Now, I would believe because cornerbacks do go up and down in these grades, and you have to get like 3 or 4 years to really get a good sample on a guy. So I believe he could go up in that. But when you think about somebody who graded 71st and whether you can replace them or not, you probably can. I mean, can you replace someone who can go one-on-one, Julio Jones, week 1? Probably not.
Yeah, that becomes a lot tougher.
But can you scheme it otherwise, like they did when Holton Hill was in? They didn't have Holton Hill lock down Michael Thomas or whoever it was that they were playing. I forget. Did he play against the Saints? Who did he play against? Somebody that had a good wide receiver. And they didn't like have Holton Hill go.
I think you're right.
Take on the number 1 wide receiver.
Right.
So instead, it might have been where Rhodes missed the game against the Saints. Yeah, Holton Hill didn't go lock down Michael Thomas like Xavier Rhodes did.
He got a lot of help.
And they still played pretty solid defense in that football game.
Right.
So when you're looking at the Vikings, because this is going to be your next question, Judd. So sorry, I'll jump in front of you with this.
I got another question too.
The depth chart.
Yeah.
What would it be like if they traded Xavier Rhodes?
Okay.
What you would have is you might move Mackenzie Alexander to outside and play someone else like Mike Hughes and nickel. Now, Hughes is coming back from the injury, but if he's on track, they would know that, not me.
I don't think I want to do that. I think I've invested so much time in McKenzie being inside. I think I leave him inside.
Okay, so if he is inside,
Hughes can play outside, though.
Then you have Trey Waynes and Mike Hughes on the outside with Holton Hill missing the first 4 games.
Yep.
And then beyond that, that is where it gets shaky. You have Chris Boyd, who they drafted in the 7th. Craig James, who showed some potential last year in preseason. He's on the team as well. And then just guys, camp body type players. You are playing with fire if you trade Xavier Rhodes.